taking a trip today into the world of modern arch toppery. This is an Ibanez AF71F. It's not a super expensive model, but the build quality on these is quite impressive for the money. This player acquired it, likes the way it plays, but he's run afoul of the position of the electronics controls. There has been a rather recent tradition, by which I mean to say like 45 years or so, in the jazz guitar world of attempting to uphold the magical qualities of the soundboard by not drilling holes in it for pickup controls. This may have started with Jimmy DeQuisto, who had a very purist attitude when it came to his guitars. He wanted them to function as acoustic instruments without any compromise, and the fact that players wanted to amplify them was not really his concern, but he made a concession by mounting the controls to the pickguard or the finger rest, rather than putting them in the top in the standard Gibson placement around the F-hole. And he, along with Bob Benedetto and a couple of other people, were the ones who started hanging the pickup off the end of the neck, too. The idea being to keep the top unfettered by deleterious elements. This idea caught on and was adopted by many makers and manufacturers. In many cases, despite the fact that the instruments are made with very thick, laminated tops, and any acoustic qualities to them are almost incidental. But if we're philosophical about it, we have to admit that there was an awful lot of good jazz guitar played and recorded on instruments with pickups screwed to the face and electronics screwed to the soundboard. Sometimes, though, there's an ergonomic thing. The position in this case of the volume knob, which is right here, was right in the player's way, and he just kept on bumping it. It's annoying. His first thought was to purchase a thin set of thumb wheel controls and mount them to the underside of the pickguard in an unobtrusive location. He's not wild about the leftover holes from the controls there, and he thought about having a replacement guard made. No biggie. And then he considered the usability factor again. This is something that others who have tried this road have discovered. If you put the controls in an out-of-the-way location, they can be very hard to find when you need them during performance. So we're being Philistines. We're going to drill holes through the plywood, and we're going to put them where Gibson originally thought they should be. Before we go too far, we should record the action. On the bass side, we have about 5 1/2 64ths, and on the treble, 5 64ths. Might be able to come down a little bit on the treble side. And what seems to be a pretty new set of flat wound strings. The player himself was plotting and scheming a little bit here. Let's see what he's left us. That seems to be a piece of string. Tied carefully to the pickguard bracket, which leads to, I believe, are some mini pots, as were found in many Korean-style instruments. These have a whole lot of packing washers on them. We'll save those for future use. Those could come in handy. Basically to make it a little bit more low profile, because it's going through a pickguard which is only about 3 millimeters thick, slightly less than 1/8 of an inch. So, yeah, we can do that. Next question is, how far do these come? Oh yes, there is enough lead wire for us to not have to mess around too much when we drill those holes. Okay, I don't have to splice the wires, in other words, which is kind of a bonus. The top on this appears to have been pressed from laminations of birch. Someone called me on that once and said, "Hey, how do you know that's not solid wood?" And I said, "Of course, my good man, this grain configuration does not appear in nature." No, these things are made with logs of solid birch, which are steamed and then put on a lathe. And they get peeled with a big knife. It comes off almost like toilet paper off the roll, and creates a lovely material for laminating. But it does look like laminated birch ply. If you work with enough plywood, you start to understand it. And this is kind of interesting. They have sanded through the top layer into the almost into the second layer here. See the adhesive a different kind of chatoyance. Now then, I need to make a pick guard, and having the original to work with should make that a simple thing. But there is one decision to make, and that is whether I use this to create a solid template for routing, or just trace it and freehand cut the darn thing. What gives me pause is the fact that this has an angled bevel on it, and it might be nice just to route that angle with a chamfer bit. Still, the extra time adds up, and I'm not likely to get asked to make another one of these guards ever, so I have to balance that with the prospect of scraping this angle by hand, which I don't think is that arduous. I think that's the way I want to do it. I'll just use some masking tape. Here's a kind of technical subtlety. Because I'm going to be using sanders to refine the shape after bandsawing, sometimes they have a tendency to pick up the masking tape. Like they'll cut through the plastic and the masking tape won't, and it'll sort of flop around on top, making a very indistinct line. By using a scalpel to score into the plastic here, that means the masking tape will fly away rather than fold, and I'll be able to see what I'm doing.
I have to drill some holes for the mounting screws, and also for the little radius in the corners of the pickup cut out.
Cutting this thin plastic sheet, it's useful to have a zero clearance kind of situation. This is an auxiliary piece of masonite on top of the table which surrounds the blade and basically keeps it from vibrating right at the point of cut.
Inside curves are obviously best done on a spindle sander. Outside curves, however, are much easier to do on a disc sander.
For the straight line, I'll use a hand plane. In the pickup section here, I'll file to the line. Okay, to mark this bevel here, I'm going to use a purfling cutter, which is just a knife blade that's held in a block with some adjustability, some set screws, and a fence, which will ride against the edge of the material. And I'm not making a deep score line, I'm just lightly marking where I want the bevel to end. Now I can use my razor blade as a scraper. Scrape down one color layer at a time, trying to keep the width of the lines consistent. And just clean up the edges with some fine sandpaper. Okay, that looks reasonable. Have to plot where we want these things to go. Hopefully somewhere there isn't a brace. Right about there. Sometimes it's nice to put some knobs down and picture it that way. I'm going to drill a pilot hole, slightly smaller diameter than what I need. Start off going backwards. It scores the finish. I'll try and back this up with a little block of wood. I'm going to end up drilling into my fingertip anyway, no matter what I do, but try and go slow. Not too much downward pressure. And these are still slightly undersized, so I'll take my reamer and make them fit. Now I've got to try and wrangle these through the holes. Shouldn't be too difficult. The trick will be to see how many washers we actually need. I don't think... yeah, one less. Try not to drop them all inside the guitar, of course. I'm going to chamfer the holes. Screw for the bracket was missing when the customer received the instrument, and it had been replaced with a Robertson or a square drive screw, which does not look the part. So I found one of these. There's a little rubber spacer. And we may need to bend this support bracket slightly. We don't want the pickguard coming up too close to the E string. That's annoying. Yeah, it's a little bit bothersome. I'd like to see it a little bit lower than that. I'll give it a little zhuzh with finger power alone. Here's a tip. The back of a pickguard that is nice and smooth and shiny can sometimes carry static across it. So to prevent that, use a little bit of coarse sandpaper and scuff it up. It doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it's really kind of infuriating. If anytime you touch it, there's a crackle. The customer wanted to know if I could attach this wire to the back of the pickguard rather than having it loose, and I guess I can try. Okay, I think that looks all right. It's good and sturdy, doesn't bounce off the top, plenty of room for strumming, and looks pretty good. So now's the moment when we got to do a shout out to Grace DeMarin at Guelph Guitar Repair, who has to see any incidents of plastic peeling. I'm going to drop the action on the treble side just a little bit. Thought I was done, but something was bugging me. All of the plastic on this guitar is an aged yellowy color, whereas this is stark white. It doesn't match. So I'm going to put just a little bit of age on it with a marker. This is a Pro Marker Mustard, which I find fairly useful. It's not much, but it's, you know, just enough to sort of break the snowstorm, as it were.